Ethan stood at the edge of the small settlement, his boots sinking slightly into the dusty ground. The alien planet was quiet today, but he could feel the tension in the air. He had been stationed here for nearly a week now, and the silence of the world around him only made him more uneasy. As a soldier, he was used to action, but this planet was different. The people here, the Zalorians, had a reputation for being independent and fiercely protective of their land. He didn't like visitors, especially not humans. His mission was clear: make contact with the locals, assess the situation, and report back. But there was one problem. He had no idea where to begin. Zalorians didn't have a central village or any clear leader. Instead, they lived in small groups scattered across the planet's vast plains. All he had to go on was a vague report that there was one girl, an important member of the community he needed to meet. Ethan had heard stories of the Zalorians, but none had prepared him for the moment he first saw Zara. She was standing by a tree, her back straight and her eyes locked on the horizon, as if waiting for something or someone. Zara was tall and graceful, her skin a deep shade of violet that shimmered slightly in the sunlight. Her long, dark hair cascaded down her back in loose waves, and her sharp, defined features gave her an air of authority. But it wasn't just her looks that caught Ethan's attention. It was her presence. There was something magnetic about her, a quiet power that made it hard to look away. When Ethan approached, Zara didn't even glance at him. She stood there, unmoving, her gaze still fixed on the distance. He hesitated for a moment before speaking. "Excuse me," he called out, his voice a little unsure. Zara didn't turn around. "I'm fine alone," she replied, without a hint of emotion in her voice, as though she had already made up her mind. Ethan blinked, unsure if she had heard him or was simply ignoring him. He took a step forward, trying again. "I've been sent too," I said. "I'm fine alone," she interrupted, finally turning her head to meet his gaze. Her eyes were a piercing shade of silver, cold and unyielding. "I don't need any help." Ethan was taken aback. The tone in her voice was sharp, almost like a warning. But there was something in the way she spoke, a flicker of something deeper beneath her tough exterior. He couldn't tell if it was pride or something else entirely. Regardless, it was clear she didn't want anything to do with him. He couldn't help but smile, though, partly out of confusion and partly out of curiosity. "All right, I get it, but you're not exactly easy to ignore." Zara raised an eyebrow, her lips curling into a slight smirk. "I'm not trying to be easy. I've survived just fine without help. I don't need anyone." Her words hung in the air between them, and Ethan felt a strange sense of frustration building inside him. She was so confident, so sure of herself. He could see why the Zalorians held her in high regard. But at the same time, he knew that no one could truly be self-sufficient. Not in a world like this. He stepped closer, his boots crunching softly against the ground. "I wasn't sent here to make you feel weak," he said, his voice softening. "I'm just trying to do my job. You don't have to like me, but we might need to work together eventually." Zara studied him for a long moment, her eyes narrowing as she sized him up. Ethan held his breath, wondering what she was thinking. Would she ignore him and walk away? Or would she open up, even just a little? Finally, she let out a sigh as though she had grown tired of the conversation. "I don't trust humans," she said flatly. "You're all the same. You come here thinking you can save us, but you can't. We don't need saving." Ethan felt a twinge of guilt. He understood why she felt that way. Humans had a history of interfering in places they didn't belong. He wasn't here to save anyone. But how could he explain that to her without sounding like a typical soldier? "I'm not here to save you," he said, a little more firmly this time. "I'm just trying to make sure everything's okay here. If there's anything you need, I'm happy to help. But if not, I'll leave." Zara turned her back to him again, as though dismissing him completely. "I don't need your help. I never have." Ethan stood there for a moment, feeling the weight of her words. He wasn't sure why he was still standing there trying to make this connection when she clearly didn't want it. But something about her strength, her independence kept him from walking away as the sun began to set. Casting long shadows across the alien landscape, Ethan finally turned to leave. But before he could take a step, Zara spoke again. Don't. Think you can just walk away when it suits you, she said, her voice softer now, though still firm. If you're staying, you'll need to prove yourself. That's the way things work here. Ethan turned back to her, surprised by the sudden shift in her tone. He nodded. I understand. Not leaving until I've done what I came here to do. Zara didn't answer, but the way her eyes lingered on him told him that she might be more interested in his presence than she let on. Ethan couldn't be sure, but something had changed in the air between them. The challenge was set, and he couldn't walk away just yet. The next day, Ethan returned to the same spot where he had met Zara. He had spent the night thinking about their brief encounter. He hadn't expected her to be so distant and cold. Most people, when faced with a stranger, were at least a little open, a little curious, but Zara, she was something else entirely. Ethan knew that if he was going to get anywhere with her, he'd have to prove himself, just as she had hinted. But how? She had made it clear that she didn't need saving. Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that she might need something else. As he walked through the village, the air felt heavy. The sounds of the Zalorians going about their day were comforting in a strange way. They were quiet people, their eyes sharp and focused, just like Zara. He could tell they were watching him, trying to figure out if he was a threat or just another human sent to play the hero. But this wasn't about them. It was about Zara. His thoughts were interrupted by the loud cry of a creature in the distance. It was a sharp, almost painful sound that cut through the air like a blade. Ethan immediately recognized it as the Terek, a massive, predatory beast that roamed the plains. He had heard stories of it, but he had never seen one up close. And now, it sounded like it was getting closer. Before he could react, a group of Zalorians began to run past him, their faces tense and alert. They were headed in the direction of the cry. Ethan followed, his instincts kicking in. As he moved through the brush, he spotted Zara ahead, standing her ground in the open. She was staring directly at the direction of the Terek's roar. Zara. Ethan called, but she didn't respond. She didn't even flinch. He approached cautiously, keeping his voice low. The Terek's near. You should get to safety. Zara turned to face him, her eyes cold, but strangely steady. I'm fine alone, she said once again, though there was a slight tremor in her voice this time. Ethan noticed it, but he didn't comment, without waiting for him to argue. She turned and started running toward the creature's last known location. Ethan hesitated for a moment before following her. His job wasn't to argue, it was to ensure her safety, whether she liked it or not. When they reached a high ridge that overlooked a wide clearing, they saw it. The Terek. It was even larger than he had imagined, with scales that shimmered like polished metal. Its eyes glowed a fierce yellow, and its massive claws dug into the earth as it prowled. It wasn't alone. Few of the Zalorians had already engaged the creature, using their weapons to keep it distracted, but it was clear that they were struggling. The Terek was powerful, and they were losing ground. Zara stood at the edge of the ridge, her eyes locked on the creature. Without a word, she pulled out a small, sleek weapon from her belticator, a short-range plasma rifle. She checked the power settings and aimed it at the beast. Ethan watched her for a moment, unsure of what to do. He wasn't familiar with Zalorian combat, but it was clear she knew what she was doing. He could see the focus in her eyes, the way she moved with a sense of purpose. But there was something else there, too. He could see the slight hesitation in her hands, the way she seemed to be fighting a battle inside herself as the Terok charged. Toward one of the Zalorians, Ethan didn't think. They ran, pushing past Zara to intercept the beast. Out. He pulled out his rifle, aiming for the creature's side. The shot landed, but it barely phased the Terek. It turned toward him, its massive jaws snapping as it charged. Zara was right behind him in an instant. She fired, hitting the creature in the eye. The Terek let out a deafening roar, but the strike seemed to slow it down just enough for the Zalorians to regroup and start a coordinated attack. Ethan took a step back, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He wasn't prepared for how fast everything had happened. Zara had been right, this planet was dangerous. And yet, he couldn't help but feel a sense of pride for the way she had handled herself. Once the Terek was distracted, The Zolorians managed to subdue it, using a net-like weapon to restrain the creature. The battle was over, but the tension in the air was still thick. Zara approached him, her face a mask of calm. "You did all right," she said, her tone still distant, but there was a flicker of something in her eyes. "You're not as useless as I thought." Ethan smiled, feeling a small sense of accomplishment. He wasn't sure if it was a compliment, but he took it as one. "Thanks," he said, trying to keep his voice light. "I wasn't sure I could keep up." "You did well," Zara repeated, though she didn't elaborate. Instead, she turned and began walking back toward the village without another word. Ethan followed her, feeling the weight of her words. It wasn't much, but it was something. They'd survived the attack together, and maybe, just maybe, Zara was starting to see him as more than just another human who didn't belong. As they reached the village, Zara stopped and turned to face him, her eyes still unreadable. "I don't need anyone," she said quietly, almost as if she were reminding herself. "But maybe I don't mind having you around." Ethan didn't know what to say. The moment felt fragile, like any wrong word could break the connection. They had started to build. But instead of speaking, he simply nodded, accepting her words for what they were. There was still much to learn about Zara and the people of this planet, but for the first time since his arrival, Ethan felt like he might just have a chance. The days following the Tarek encounter were quiet, but the tension between Ethan and Zara remained thick. She had saved him, and he had saved her, the way they had both proven themselves to each other, yet there was still a distance that neither seemed willing to cross. Ethan couldn't ignore the way his thoughts always returned to Zara. She was strong, independent, and self-assured. Everything about her seemed so untouchable. But the more he observed her, the more he realized there was something else, something more fragile, hidden beneath her tough exterior. He could see it when her guard slipped, even if it was only for a brief moment. Her eyes softened, just for a second, whenever she looked at him after their close calls. But Zara wasn't someone who would easily let anyone in, least of all a human like him. He respected that, even though it left him frustrated. There were moments when he wanted to break through the walls she had carefully built around herself. Yet every time he thought he was getting close, she pulled back again, one afternoon. While they were sitting at the edge of the village, watching the sunset paint the sky with shades of red and orange, Ethan tried to start a conversation. "You ever think about what happens after all this?" Ethan asked, trying to sound casual. Zara turned her gaze toward him, her expression unreadable. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice flat. "I mean after we're done here, after the mission's over and everything's settled." Ethan shifted uncomfortably, not sure why he was even bringing it up. "You think you'll stay here? Go somewhere else?" Zara's eyes narrowed as she looked away, her attention drifting back to the horizon. "I'll stay here," she said quietly. "It's where I belong." Ethan nodded. He had figured as much. Zara belonged here among her people. She didn't seem like the type to leave her home for anything, even if she was alone. But Ethan couldn't shake the thought that she might be more alone than she let on. They sat in silence for a while. Ethan could hear the rustling of the trees in the wind, the distant calls of creatures in the jungle, but it was Zara's stillness that weighed heavily on him. He wanted to ask her more, to dig deeper into her mind, but he knew she wouldn't open up like that. Not yet. "Do you ever get lonely?" he asked suddenly, surprising himself as much as her. Zara glanced at him, her eyes sharp. "No," she answered, without hesitation. "I don't need anyone." Ethan didn't press the matter. He had learned that arguing with Zara wasn't going to get him anywhere. He had to let her come to her own conclusions, just like she had with the Tarek. Later that evening, as they walked through the village, they encountered one of the Zolorian elders. He was a tall, regal figure, his skin a darker shade of violet than Zara's. His name was Aro, and he was known as the voice of wisdom in the community. He looked at Ethan with a mixture of curiosity and caution, as though deciding whether or not he was truly worthy of being in their presence. "Ethan," Zara said, her voice respectful but firm. "This is Aro. He's one of the leaders of our people." Ethan nodded, offering a greeting. "It's an honor," he said, trying to keep his tone steady. Eero studied him for a long moment before speaking. "You're the human soldier who saved Zara." Ethan nodded again, a little uneasy under Eero's gaze. "I did what I had to do. Wasn't about to let anyone get hurt." Eero tilted his head, considering the words. "Your people are quick to offer help, but sometimes that help is not wanted." He spoke slowly, carefully, as though each word had weight. "Zara does not need your protection." Ethan glanced at Zara, unsure how to respond. She didn't look angry, but she didn't look pleased either. It was clear that Eero's words had hit home for both of them. "I understand," Ethan said finally. "But I'm not here to protect anyone. I'm just trying to do what's right for everyone." "I think that's what's important." Eero said nothing more. But the look he gave Ethan was enough to let him know. The conversation was over. As the elder walked away, Zara gave Ethan a glance, her face unreadable. "You don't have to prove yourself to them," Zara said softly. "You already did when you saved me." Ethan didn't know how to respond to that. Part of him felt like she was opening up, even if only a little. But the other part of him wasn't sure if she meant it. He couldn't tell if it was her pride speaking, or if there was more beneath the surface. Later that night, as they sat around the communal fire with the other villagers, the crackling flames cast long shadows across their faces. Ethan sat across from Zara, watching her as she spoke quietly. With the other Zalorians, she seemed so much more at ease here, surrounded by her people. They respected her. It was clear that she respected them in return. But even as she laughed and shared stories with her friends, Ethan could sense that there was something more to Zara than the strong, independent woman she showed the world. He had caught glimpses of it before, the moments when she let down her guard, even just for a second. The warmth of the fire reflected in her eyes. But there was a coldness there too, a shadow that Ethan couldn't shake. It was like she was afraid of getting too close to anyone, even if it was someone who had proven himself to her. As the night wore on, the villagers began to gather their things and head back to their homes. Zara stood and motioned for Ethan to follow her. "I'm heading back," she said, her voice quiet again. "You coming?" Ethan nodded. There was something about the way she said it, the way she invited him, that felt like an opening. Maybe it wasn't much, but it was something. They'd been through so much together, and yet Zara was still holding back. But Ethan wasn't ready to give up. He couldn't be. There was a part of him that needed to understand her to break. Through that wall she had built around herself, as they walked together under the stars, Ethan couldn't help but wonder if someday Zara would finally let him in. The peaceful days that followed the Terek attack seemed almost too calm. The days were filled with small moments, quiet conversations, shared tasks, and long walks under the alien stars. Ethan began to feel like he was becoming part of the community, even if just a small part. Zara, however, remained distant. She had stopped pushing him away as harshly as before. But there was still an invisible line between them that neither of them crossed. Ethan didn't mind. He had come to respect Zara's need for space. There were moments when he caught her looking at him, and for just a second there was something there, a flicker of something softer than the guarded person she always showed the world. But it never lasted long. One evening, after a long day of helping with repairs around the village, Ethan sat near the edge of the settlement, gazing at the stars. His mind was wandering, thinking about his mission, the strange planet, and of course, Zara. She had been quiet all day, her usual sharpness subdued. Ethan wondered if it had something to do with the way the Zalorians had treated him the day before, when Eero had spoken so pointedly about him not being needed. As he sat there, lost in thought, he heard it. Sharp, high-pitched screech that echoed across the night. It was followed by a rumble, and then the sound of heavy footsteps. Ethan's heart skipped a beat. That screech could only mean one thing, the Karak. A creature much larger and more dangerous than the Terek. It was the kind of creature that could wipe out an entire settlement if it wasn't stopped. Without thinking, Ethan jumped to his feet, his training kicking in. He reached for his weapon, but it was gone. He'd left it back at the main camp. A mistake he'd soon regret. Karak was getting closer, and it was obvious that it wouldn't stop until it had destroyed everything in its path. Ethan didn't waste any more time. He ran toward the center of the village, shouting for anyone who could help. "The Karyak's coming. Get to cover." The villagers scrambled, some of them shouting orders, while others ran toward the defensive positions. Ethan found himself looking for Zara, but she was nowhere in sight. Panic gripped him. She could be anywhere, and the creature was closing in fast. He spotted her standing on the ridge, looking down toward the clearing where the Karak was now visible. The massive creature moved slowly at first, but its every step caused the ground to tremble. The Karyak's body was covered in thick, jagged scales, and its claws could crush anything in their path. Its glowing red eyes locked on the village, and it roared again. "Zara!" Ethan called, running toward her. "Get back to the village. It's too dangerous." Zara didn't move. She was still standing at the edge, her eyes fixed on the Karak, her body tense. "I won't run," she said, her voice steady but strained. "I'll fight. It's what we do." Ethan stopped in his tracks, disbelief flashing across his face. "You can't take that thing down by yourself." "I don't need your help," Zara replied firmly, turning to face him. I've fought worse." Before Ethan could argue further, Zara was already moving. She sprinted toward the clearing, her rifle in hand. She was fast, much faster than he expected. Ethan didn't have time to stop her. If she wanted to fight, there was nothing he could do to change her mind. But he couldn't let her face the Karak alone. Ethan followed her at full speed, adrenaline rushing through his veins. He had no plan, no weapon, but he wasn't going to let Zara fight alone. When they reached the clearing, Zara was already positioning herself, taking cover behind a large rock. She fired a shot at the Karak, but it barely made a dent in the creature's thick hide. The Karak growled, swiping its massive claws at the ground, sending debris flying in all directions. Ethan reached Zara's side, breathing heavily. "This isn't going to work. We need a plan." Zara glanced at him, her face set in determination. "We don't have time for a plan. Just shoot and keep moving." Ethan nodded, taking cover beside her. He aimed his rifle at the Karyak's side and fired. The shot hit, but the creature barely flinched. It was huge, way beyond anything he had ever faced in his training. But he knew they couldn't stop. Now, if they didn't keep the Karak distracted, the entire village would be destroyed. Zara fired again, this time aiming for the creature's eyes. It roared in pain, but the Karak wasn't down. Instead, it charged at them, its massive form shaking the ground with every step. Ethan's heart raced. They couldn't outrun it, and they couldn't outgun it. But there was one thing they could. "Do, Zara," Ethan shouted over the noise of the Karyak's roar. "We need to lead it toward the trap. We can't fight it head-on." Zara didn't hesitate. She nodded and began to run, drawing the Karyak's attention as she sprinted toward the trap the villagers had set up in the nearby woods. Ethan followed close behind, firing another shot to keep the creature's focus on them. The Karak chased after them, its footsteps growing louder as it closed in. Zara reached the trap first, ducking behind a large tree. Ethan wasn't far behind. He looked back to see the Karyak's claws coming down toward him. In a split second, he dove behind the tree, just as the trap activated. A massive net shot up from the ground, catching the Karak by its legs. The creature thrashed, roaring in fury, but the net held firm. The villagers rushed in from the sides, using their weapons to finish the job. After several tense moments, the Karak finally stopped struggling. The clearing fell silent. Except for the heavy breathing of Ethan and Zara, they stood, catching their breath, and for the first time, Zara looked at Ethan, her expression softer than it had been before. "You were right," she said quietly. "I couldn't have done it alone," Ethan smiled, feeling a surge of relief. "We did it together." Zara didn't respond immediately. Instead, she looked out over the clearing, her face still serious. "It's not over yet. There are more out there, and we'll have to fight them too." Ethan nodded. He wasn't sure what the future held, but one thing was certain: he would stand beside her, no matter what came next. The days after the Karak attack were quieter, but they felt heavier. The village had sustained some damage, but it could be rebuilt. Ethan helped with the repairs, his thoughts constantly drifting back to Zara. He couldn't stop thinking about how close they had come to losing everything, and how they had worked together to save the village. The battle with the Karak had been dangerous, but it had also shown him something important. Zara wasn't as invincible as she seemed. For the first time, he had seen her shaken. She hadn't let her guard down fully, but he had caught a glimpse of something deeper, something she had tried to hide for so long. She wasn't just a warrior. She was a person who had been carrying a lot of pain and responsibility on her shoulders for years. And despite her tough exterior, she didn't always have the answers. Zara had avoided him after the battle. She was still the same, keeping her distance and focusing on her duties. But Ethan knew something had shifted. She had allowed herself to rely on him in a way she hadn't before. It was small, but it meant something. He had seen it in her eyes during the fight, when they had fought side by side to take down the Karak. One evening, as the sun set, casting long shadows over the village, Ethan spotted Zara standing alone near the ridge. She was looking at the stars again, just as she had the first time they met. This time, though, she seemed lost in thought, her body language different from before. He could see the way her shoulders were slumped slightly, a sign of exhaustion, perhaps something more. He hesitated, unsure if he should approach her. After everything that had happened, he didn't want to push her further away, but he couldn't ignore the feeling in his chest. There was something unspoken between them, something that neither of them had acknowledged, but both of them knew was there. Taking a deep breath, he walked up to her. She didn't turn when she heard him approach, but she didn't turn him away. Either, it was as if she was waiting for him to speak first. "Zara," he said softly, his voice steady. "You okay?" For a long moment there was no response. Then, finally, Zara spoke, her voice quieter than usual. "I'm fine," she said. Though the words didn't sound as confident as they usually did, I need some time to think. Ethan nodded, respecting her need for space. "I get it, I just wanted to check in." She turned to face him then, her eyes meeting his with a mixture of surprise and something else. For the first time, she didn't look away. "I've been thinking too," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "about what happened, about us." Ethan's heart skipped a beat. He wasn't sure what she meant, but he was afraid to interrupt. "Her. I've always been alone, Ethan," she continued, her gaze distant again. "I've always had to do things on my own. I thought I could handle everything by myself. But after the Karak, I'm not so sure anymore." Zara's voice trembled for just a moment before she regained her composure. She cleared her throat and looked back out over the horizon, as if gathering her thoughts before speaking again. "I don't know what it is about you, but you're different," she said, her tone still guarded but honest. "You don't push. You don't expect things from me that I can't give. And I don't know why, but that's made a difference." Ethan swallowed, feeling the weight of her words. He didn't want to say the wrong thing, but he couldn't ignore how he felt. It had been a slow burn, this connection between them, and he had tried so hard not to make it more than what it was. But now, standing there with her, he realized something. Couldn't pretend anymore. "I'm not trying to make you depend on me, Zara," he said quietly, taking a step closer. I just want to be here. I want to be here for you, whether you need me or not." Zara looked at him then, her expression softening, the walls she had built around herself slowly beginning to crumble. She studied him for a moment, her silver eyes searching his face as if trying to read something she hadn't understood before. "Why?" she asked, her voice full of quiet curiosity. "Because—" Ethan hesitated, trying to find the right words. "'Cause I think you're worth it. And I've seen what you can do, even when you don't believe in yourself." Zara's gaze softened, and for the first time, she looked vulnerable, her eyes betraying emotions she had kept hidden for so long. She seemed to struggle with something for a moment, her hands clenching and unclenching at her sides. But then, she finally let out a breath and stepped forward, closing the distance between them. "I don't know how to trust people anymore," she said softly. "Not like this. Not after everything that's happened to me." Ethan nodded, understanding her hesitation. "I know it's hard. I'm not asking you to trust me right away. No. But I'm here. I'll be here. Whenever you're ready. The silence stretched between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was more like an understanding, something unspoken that they both knew was there. Zara finally looked up at him again, her lips trembling slightly. Maybe. Have to do everything alone, she said, her voice quieter than before. Maybe I can let someone in. Ethan felt a surge of warmth in his chest. He didn't know what the future held, but in that moment, he knew they had crossed a line, one that neither of them could go back from. I'll be here, he repeated, his voice steady, and for the first time, Zara allowed herself to smile, even if it was small and fleeting. She didn't say anything more, but the look she gave him was enough. Wasn't alone anymore. The days after the moment on the ridge were filled with a quiet kind of tension. Nothing explosive had happened, but there was a subtle change. Ethan noticed it in the way Zara now looked at him. The small glances she would give him when she thought he wasn't paying attention. It wasn't a lot, but it was enough. For the first time, Zara wasn't shutting herself off from him completely. She wasn't pushing him away. It wasn't easy for either of them. Zara had built walls around herself for so long that even the smallest crack was a big deal. But Ethan could see the effort. She was trying. And that meant everything. They spent more time together in the days that followed, working side by side to help the village recover from the damage caused by the car wreck. There was a sense of unity in the village now, a shared understanding that they were all in this together. But there was still something unspoken between Zara and Ethan. Neither of them had put words to what was happening between them. Neither was in a rush to do so. One evening, after a long day of repairing a damaged building, Ethan and Zara found themselves sitting on the ground at the edge of the village, watching the sunset together. The sky was painted with hues of pink and purple, and the cool breeze rustled the trees gently. It was peaceful, and for a moment, it almost felt like they were the only two people in the world. I never really thought about what happens after the battle, Zara said quietly, breaking the silence. Her voice was softer than usual, almost reflective. I never thought about how much it changes you, not just the village, but me. Ethan turned to look at her, sensing the weight behind her words. You've been through a lot, Zara. I know. It's not easy to open up, but you don't have to do it all alone. I told you before, I'm here for you whenever you need. Zara gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, but she didn't speak right away. Instead, she stared out at the horizon, her fingers tracing patterns in the dirt. I never realized how much I was shutting people out, she said after a while, her voice steady but tinged with regret. I pushed everyone away, even when I didn't mean to. I thought it was easier that way, but it's not. It never was. Ethan didn't know what to say. He could feel the sincerity in her words. It was clear that she was going through something deeper than just the battle with the car wreck. There was a part of her that had always carried this weight. It was starting to lift piece by piece. You're not alone anymore, Ethan said softly, and you don't have to be. Zara looked at him then, her eyes searching his face, as if trying to find the truth in his words. There was a vulnerability in her gaze, one that Ethan hadn't seen before. For a brief moment, it felt like they were standing on the edge of something new, a new beginning, a new chapter. She took a deep breath, and for the first time, she smiled. It was small, almost shy, but it was real. Maybe I can learn to trust. Again, she said quietly. Maybe I can learn that it's okay to let people in. Ethan smiled back, feeling a warmth spread through him. He had always believed that trust was something that couldn't be forced. It had to be earned, and Zara was doing that, slowly but surely. He wasn't going to push her. He was going to be patient and let her find her way at her own pace. The sun had set completely now, and the stars were beginning to twinkle in the sky. The night was calm, peaceful, and for the first time in a long while, Zara seemed at peace too. She wasn't carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders anymore. She was allowing herself to be a part of something bigger, something that included Ethan. I don't know what's going to happen, she said, her voice thoughtful, but I think I'm ready to face it. Not just alone, but with you. Ethan's heart skipped a beat, and he couldn't stop the smile that spread across his face. It wasn't a confession, not yet, but it was more than he had expected. It's for Zara to say she was ready to face whatever. came next with him by her side, that was everything. "You don't have to face it alone," Ethan said, his voice steady and sure, "and you won't." They sat in silence for a while, the comfortable kind of silence that came from knowing you didn't need to say anything more. They had said enough, for now. Zara was finally letting go of the walls she had built around herself, and Ethan was there to help her through it. He didn't have all the answers, but he didn't need them. All he needed was to be by her side. The next few days were filled with more work, more quiet moments, and more small steps toward healing. Zara and Ethan began to share more than just physical space. They shared stories, laughs, and even moments of vulnerability. Zara had always been the one to take the lead, but now she was starting to lean on Ethan, just a little bit at a time. And though there were still many challenges ahead, both for the village and for their growing connection, Ethan felt a sense of hope he hadn't felt before. Zara wasn't the same person she had been when he first arrived. She was changing, and so was he. Together they were becoming something new, something stronger. Zara had always been strong, but now she was learning that it was okay to let others in, to share her strength instead of carrying it alone. Ethan had always been the soldier, the one trained to fight. But now he was learning that sometimes strength didn't come from fighting, it came from standing beside someone who needed you, and offering them the trust to stand beside you. In return, and with that, they began the next chapter of their journey together.